Hey guys, how y'all doing? Hope you're all doing well. I haven't made a video in quite a while, a few months I guess. Have life happens and stuff happens, so it's like you don't get a chance sometimes to sit down and make a video or whatnot. But it's all right. Anyhow, so today I'm going to talk about John Lennon, and particularly his last day alive, which was on December the 8th, 1980. Uh, John Lennon is someone that I really love his music. He just seemed to be a very good person. I really wish that I could have met him, even though he passed in December 1980. Excuse me. I was born in December 1982, so I came along 2 years later. But yeah, it's funny. But the reason why I'm going to be making this video, particularly for me, is to let people know the actual facts of what happened, specifically on his last day alive. I mean, there's a lot of documentaries that are on YouTube, and they're very fairly accurate. But if one is like this and another one is like that, you gotta, for me particularly, to watching these videos and seeing that this fact is wrong, or it's put in this context of this video, uh, and it's wrong, or if it's right, it's fine, it's right. But some documentaries, they have so much stuff you're watching it and you find yourself, getting confused. Because, well, was that how it happened? Is that how it happened? So basically, I said, what, I'm going to make a video and see if anybody kind of can see what I mean. I don't plan on making this a very long video, but who knows, it might go into something longer. So basically, if we're gonna talk about John Lennon's last day alive, it was on December the 8th, 1980. Uh, a lifelong fan of his was a guy named Paul Goresh, or Gorish. I've heard him one documentary, Goresh and Gorish. I don't think he mattered how it was said. And he plays a key figure into the night that John Lennon, his last day alive, really till the night of the shooting that sadly John lost his life. Um, I think that Paul Goresh's testimony to what he's said over and over throughout the years. I believe his first time he spoke publicly or made a video was 1990, and then he was on the day John Lennon died, 2010. There's other ones too where he was involved too, because he is a very, very much a key figure in John Lennon's life for the last couple of months of John's life. How we all seen the story, I'm sure, about how he managed to get into John Lennon's hotel room, posing as a VCR repairman. That was very wow. When I watched that, I said, "Wow, that could have went really, really bad if somebody had bad whatever towards to walk and knock on John Lennon's door and walk right in." But anyhow, so Paul Goresh's testimony is very, very. It's like almost in every documentary. I think there's one documentary that I've seen that he's not in it. And the reason why I keep mentioning him is because he uh, met John in 1979, and they became really good. They became good friends. They said that like pretty much Paul Goresh was an amateur photographer, and was known as John Lennon's official, unofficial uh, person for taking photographs of him and whatnot. So basically, Paul became a regular fixture at the Dakota. Now, if you see how the Dakota is, it's if you know anything about John Lennon, and that's where he lived in the Dakota apartment buildings in New York City. And his last day, John's last day, Paul Goresh said he got there at the Dakota around noon. And there's one thing I will say about him is just that his facts, it's not a little bit off, but the way he's presented them in different documentaries, like he said certain parts that he didn't say in another documentary. But I get that. That's editing. That's how whoever is making the video, the company or whatever, they're not going to take his entire interview and make that the documentary. Although it would be very nice to hear just Paul Goresh, if his point of view from like in every one that he was in. So, anyways, he said that when he got it to the Dakota on the around noon on December the 8th, 1980, he says there was only one person standing there. It was a guy with a long overcoat on and what he described was a Russian hat, and he was holding a copy of John Lennon's recent album, Double Fantasy. And so basically, it depends. It depends how hard you look at this. He said when he arrived there to basically what he was doing was hanging out, just waiting for John to come out, and so he could talk with John and whatnot. And so he said when he got there, I'm not even gonna say the killer's name. I'll just say MDC, or I'll say his last name because he ain't worth mentioning. He took one of the most important people in the world. He ended that man's life, that person's life, and he's where he should be. That's all I'm gonna say about that. He should be, well, and so he said that when he got there, he said, MDC came up to him and said, "Hey, are you waiting for Lennon?" To which Paul Gress replied, "Yes." And he said, "My name's Mark. I'm from Hawaii." And Paul said, "I'm Paul from New Jersey." Now, that was one example of what was said in one documentary. And then in another one, Paul says that after he says that he was from Hawaii, he said that it occurred to him, he said he had a southern accent. So Paul said to him, "If you're from Hawaii, why do you have a southern accent?" And he said that he was originally from Georgia. So Paul said, "Okay." So Paul said, "So where are you staying when you're in the city?" And he said, with that, MDC looked at him and said, "Why do you want to know?" With a kind of a viciousness to in his tone of voice, and that kind of threw Paul off, And I was taken aback because he's the one who came over and initiated the conversation. He's like, "I didn't want to talk to this guy." He said, he wanted to keep John for himself, and that's what he wanted to do. So whenever MDC said that to Paul said, "Go over and stand where you were standing and leave me alone," because he was taken aback by his comments. And so basically, what I've always wondered about that last day for John, and if Paul Goresh stayed there till the time you seen John that night and spoke with him, he had to have interacted with MDC. They weren't going to sit there, I don't imagine, stand there together and not talk, or because Paul said that he didn't think that MDC was dangerous in any way at all. So I've heard stuff that like people said that he gave MDC like John's schedule, whatever schedule that would be. I wouldn't know. I didn't know John had a schedule or whatever. Well, he has a schedule, but anyways, I don't know if I believe any of that because there's one movie that came out in 2006. I think it's just simply called "The Killing of John Lennon," which is absolutely terrible, very very bad. Everything around it is just bad, especially when they show the scene. I think it's from that movie in specific. They show that scene of him, killing John, and then he shot off about 8 or 9 bullets. That right there is a no-no. John, sorry. MDC had a 38 caliber Charter Arms gun. Was what he had. It could fit 5 bullets in the chambers, and he had 5 bullets for it. So anyhow, so try not to get not confused, but try not to just take facts from one video and then put them into this one I'm making right now of stuff that should be noted. Like another example too of something that was absolutely really wrong, totally. It's I'm not sure if the movie's called Chapter 27, but there's a clip on YouTube. It's Chapter 27. Chapman gets Lennon's autograph. Now that right there is very, very confusing. If you watch all these other documentaries and then you watch this one right there, it's very, very inaccurate. Like, I'm going to try to slow myself down a little bit just to kind of get it out of the way and whatnot. So, well, we'll go back with John's last day alive. That morning, he went for a haircut at his favorite local barber, they said. And then after that, they returned to their apartment and they did a photo shoot for Rolling Stone magazine, which has become world famous. And then after that, they gave a candid, really great interview with Dave Sholin with RK Radio, with I believe somebody, Laurie Kay, I believe was a person that was in on that too as well. And I think they went over quite a bit of stuff in that documentary. In that interview. And John said such prophetic words in that interview. At one point, he says, "We're heading into an unknown territory." perhaps talking about the 1980s and how they were going to be. He also said that he hopes that he goes before Yoko because he doesn't know what he would do in his life without Yoko. And then another one that's very, very sad was he says, I'll always consider my work War and Peace, whether it be with Beatles, David Bowie, Elton John, Yoko Ono. And he says, hopefully will not see my work done, finished until I'm long dead and buried. And I hope that that's not for a long time. He said that right there in that interview. And, 3-4 hours later, he was dead. It's really, when you hear, and the interview is on YouTube. I made a playlist on my in my channel for people who want to hear that interview, the last interview he gave, and he gave one on December 6th as well to a British radio station with Andy Peebles, I believe it was. It was a lot of times on YouTube with some documentaries. They're saying that December 6th was his last interview that he ever gave, but that's not true. He gave one on the day that he died. Another thing that he also said was that he said something like, it's been edited, but I think I know the whole thing. It says, "Hello, how are you? How is your relationships? Did you get through it all? Wasn't the 70s a drag? Well, here we are now. Let's try and make the 80s good." And then he goes on to say, "Well, where there's life, there's hope." So he was pondering about the future that very night. He even said that he felt like this is a new start, just like starting over the song. He wrote. He said that he feels that nothing ever happened before today, meaning what's in his past is in his past. He feel at that moment in time he was ready to take on a new. Some say he was going to go on tour for this. I think it would have been an incredible tour to look back on now over 40 years. It'd be really, really interesting to see that. We could have seen him making music with Julian and Sean, his two sons. It's what a waste. So after the radio, the interview, this is where it gets very, very confusing for me. When I look at that video of chapter 27, and then I watched the day John Lennon died. I believe it was 2010. They're relying heavily on, like I said, Paul Goresh. They're relying heavy on his testimony because he was there that day. So, and if you're gonna look at it from this video into that one, like I said, there's a big, big margin error there. So I'm gonna try to clean it up the best I can from what I've seen, read, put together, and whatnot. Paul had went into the Dakota in the early afternoon to see if John signed his book, A Spaniard in the Works. I believe he wrote it in 1965 or 66. And he said that when he was in there, John was coming down the hall, and he looked at Paul and he said, "Paul, I'll sign your book today for you. I promise I'll sign it for you." So then, according to Paul, he went back outside to his post, he called it. So he said that, it was only just him and Mark. I hate that. MDC were the only two people that were there. And I'm sure maybe people came and went, but, nobody stayed. So later on, in that documentary from 2010, we hear Paul say that he's seen a lot of people coming out of the apartment building with silver cases and whatnot, and he said, "I figured John will be out soon." So this is where it gets confusing because Dave Sholin says that they were leaving the Dakota and taking a car and going straight to the airport to get back home in California. So what's kind of confusing about that part is that according to Paul Goresh, there was just MDC and Paul, obviously, and John and Yoko, who were right there whenever John left his apartment to go to the studio to record a Yoko Ono song from Double Fantasy called Walking on Thin Ice. Now, Paul Goresh, up until he died in 2018, I believe it was, he always basically told the same story. He never fabricated nothing. He didn't make it such a... he put the facts to the facts. And like I said, if we could listen to one complete Paul Goresh side of a documentary, we would learn a lot more. But they only, interviews, they only documentaries. They only show clips. So according to Paul, whenever John and Yoko were coming out, nobody else was around. Now think about this. If you're gonna go watch chapter 27, Chapman gets Lennon's autograph. That's just an example. I keep going back to that because it's very, very inaccurate. In that video, that clip, we see about 20 people that are coming out where John comes out to leave to go to the record plant to work on that song. But it's confusing because you hear Paul Garesh's perspective, but then you hear Dave Sholin, who says next thing you know, where John comes out, he's looking for his car, and it wasn't there. And then it cuts to like Paul. Paul says that John turned to Jose, the doorman, and said, where's my car? And he said, oh, it's not here, Mr. Lennon. So apparently, I mean, I can't dispute it. That's the fact. John said to Dave, he said, are you guys going right to the airport? And he said, yes. He's like, would you mind giving us a lift to the record plant? Hop on in. We're going in the same direction. So they got into the limo and took off. Isn't that a simple analysis? If that's the way it happened. But that is not the way it happened in a big way, because all those people that were supposedly there in that clip were not there. The only person, think about that, if there was more than just Paul waiting, there would, and having MDC there waiting for John to come out, had that been the scenario that happened, then surely the RKO radio team and all those people would see that when Chapman wanted an autograph on Double Fantasy by John right there, they all would have seen how strange and how weird it was the way he approached John to get his autograph. But those people were never there. But yet they are there because John shared a limo with the host Dave Sholin, and he went to the record plant. So you hear Paul Garesh tell his story over the years about what happened, but he doesn't say that all these people are around and that guy gave John a lift to the studio. Paul does acknowledge the studio, but he doesn't. How can I word this here? Excuse me. If all those people were there, it wouldn't have been a big deal. Cameras going off, lots of pictures and all that. That didn't happen that way, but it did. I know I'm probably confusing the hell out of you, but according to Paul, whenever it took for MDC to get the courage, he walked up to John with the Double Fantasy album and he held it out to him, and he didn't say a word. So John looked at him and said, "Do you want me to sign that?" And he nodded. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. John asked him if he had a pen. He handed John the pen. So John's signing the album. Paul has his camera, takes a few pictures of that scene of Lennon signing MDC's album. And it became one of the most famous photos of all time because he was signing the album for his killer, which is... I knew the story about that picture from a young age, and I remember thinking, that is so sad. He's signing an autograph for a fan, and it wasn't the best autograph you look at it now, but I can see why. Pens, I'm sure, are hard to write on record sleeves, and it was dark. It was at night in New York. It's dark in the wintertime. So the way Paul Garesh set that up was basically the way I just told you right now. John, Chapman didn't say anything to John, and Paul Garesh has claimed that as well. He said he just walked up to John, held the album out, took it back, and after John signed it, he gave it back to Chapman, and he said, "Is that all you want? Is that okay? Do you want anything else?" And he didn't say anything, I guess. Well, the very first thing Paul Garesh says, he took the album and went like, "No, yeah," and then took it back. But other than that, all the other ones, he says that he didn't say a word. He would just nod his head, and he just stepped back. He was strange, and Paul says he remembers looking at John, and they looked at each other and said, "You know what? That was kind of strange. Like very, very strange behavior. You don't. It's just very, very strange." So after he got his album signed, and Paul took his famous picture, John had taken. Like I said, he jumped in with the RKO team, and him and Yoko went off to the studio. So then, like I said, it leaves you pondering what the message is when it comes to what's reality and what's not, because Paul Garesh says that it was only MDC, him, John, and Yoko on the street whenever John signed the album. wasn't all these people that were there. I mean, there was eyewitnesses across the street later on for, when he got shot. But at that moment in time at the Dakota, when he signed that record, there was nobody around. And there's some documentaries that'll show, it might not show, but they'll do like reenactments or whatnot. And so yeah, he signed the album for his killer. But like I said, the one part that's messing a lot of people up is what I'm trying to explain here right now. Like it seems like Paul Garess made it seem like John was going to come out of the building not long after he's seen the radio crew coming out. And sure enough, John was right there in no time. And that's where he got his lift to the recording studio. I know I'm repeating myself here, but I'm just trying to let people know that the only person who witnessed, John signing the album were Yoko and Paul. There was nobody else there. So I'm sorry, Chapter 27, whatever you are, whatever, but you have provided false information, and it needs to be cleared up, and that's what I'm doing right now, because Paul Garess has never, since that time up until he died, he insisted on everything being the way he was. There was nobody there. It was just, John, Yoko, MDC, and Paul himself. Excuse me, lose my breath. But then, like I said, the whole thing with getting a drive with the RKO team, Paul doesn't say anything about that at all. I don't think he said that. He just said John got into his limousine and he waved to me as he went by, and he said he waved back, and he said he would. That was the last time he ever saw him. So my thing is, if that is the true way in which this whole tragedy unfolded, why would another company, another movie, put out something that's so inaccurate to make it seem like, basically making John seem like a nice person, but you really didn't have to make that up. John was like a nice guy. In all fairness, he was a really good guy, and he did not deserve what happened to him. So that was the big question that lingered in my mind whenever I seen that one and I seen these other clips and whatnot. And it's strange behavior. In one interview, not a doctor, and an author is talking with MDC in prison, and he said that Chapman went up to John and said, "John, will you sign my album?" Which is completely false. Mark, MDC, never said a word to John Lennon, according to Paul, and I'm sure Yoko, I suppose, but he didn't say a word to him. So that's another lie there too. And if he did say anything, it would have been, really timid. That's another one where Paul said, he was holding the album up very timidly, like just really, really, a very strange vibe. So anyhow, that right there is not how it happened, but it is at the same time, because John did get into that limo with the radio team, and so it makes you wonder, because if that's the case, Dave would have seen Lennon signing the album for MDC. He would have seen him right there. So it's kind of like a half a mix in the line of like history. If you want to look at it like that, it's like it didn't happen that way, but it did. So it makes you think, it makes you wonder. But I'll stand by Paul's version of events more than anything else, because he was there and he told the same story for decades. So John then going to the records, the record plant, excuse me, and they're working on Walking on Thin Ice, and it was really, John loved it. I guess he really wanted to get that done, and he liked it. He said the Yoko, I think this is your first number one. So after they were done all that, they said that they were going to either go out to eat at a restaurant or do something else. And Yoko said to John, what do you want to do? And he said, well, I want to go home and see Sean. And this is about 11:15 at night. Well, no, more towards 10:30, I would say. So they decided, just to go straight home. Little did they know what was going to await them, which is, it's terrible, So they got into their limousine, came back to the Dakota. They were on, instead of parking in the way you could have, they just pulled up. And according to MDC, when he's seen that limo, he knew He said, "This is it." And he said he had a voice in his head saying, "Do it, do it, do it." And he said Yoko got out of the car first and walked about 20 feet ahead of John, which I find quite strange. And another note, too, I don't think that MDC knows his own version of events, because he claims to have gone up to John and said, "John, will you sign my album?" And I don't know why he's saying that, because he never did do that. He never said a word to John. So anyhow, so when John gets out of the limo, he has to walk through the vestibule, like the doorway arch or whatever and whatnot. And I guess he looked at MDC and seen him standing there, and he probably thought to himself, "Why is this guy still here? I'm pretty sure I signed his album earlier today." So I guess the rest is kind of, it's ultimately just very, very sad. I'm very sure that when John walked into the way to get to the door to go up to his apartment, I'm sure he was probably thinking in his mind, "I'm walking straight right now, but you know what? This guy is here." Maybe he cared, maybe he didn't. But not long after he passed MDC, he drew a gun, and he went to a combat stance, they said, and he fired 5 shots from his Charter Arms 38 caliber, I believe, revolver. Excuse me. And the first shot he shot and missed, and he hit John 4 times. And there's one show, I think they said that John was shot in the chest and exited his back. And I can't remember what it is. I think it's I can't remember what it is, what documentary it is. It's a short one. It's very, very inaccurate. He shot John 4 times in the back. He didn't shoot him in the stomach. John was walking that way. MDC stepped out and fired those shots. There was 3 gunshot wounds to his upper left. Fatal, fatal, I guess. And he had one by his elbow. So John managed to stand up, to climb up 5 set of steps, and then he collapsed into the ground. And the police officers showed up very soon afterwards, because they got a call that there was shots fired at the Dakota, and they were there within 30 seconds to a minute. And they said that whenever they got there, they seen MDC with his hands up, and one of the officers put him up against the wall and stayed with him while other officers who came went to assist John. John was bleeding out profusely. They said they never. A lot of them said that they were never seen so much blood from anybody or anything at that time. So they said one guy, Herb Fraunberg, I believe is his name, took a pulse to see if he still had a pulse, and he did. And they said that the only ambulance was going to come in 5 to 7 minutes. And they said they knew that 5 to 7 minutes he would have died right there. So what they did was, I think police officer Jim Moran showed up. They carried John, who was practically almost deceased, limp body. They carried him. They put him in the back seat of the police car, and they drove to the Roosevelt Hospital. And it took them about 5 minutes to get there. And while all that was going on, them putting John into the cab, MDC was there and witnessed the whole thing. And, just a complete coward. Just a disregard for human life, for everything that, MDC wanted. He had other people on his list that he wanted to get a hold of, and, end their lives too. Because John Lennon, he made himself very public because he was a very public person. At the time, John Lennon, on the day he died, December 8th, 1980, was one of the most famous people in the world. I don't doubt that at all. He was in the Beatles, he was amazing. And he released a lot of solo albums. So anyhow, Chapman witnessed the whole thing. And then when they took Yoko to the hospital as well, and they cuffed Chapman, put him in the back seat of a car. And when he was in the back seat of the police car, back seat of the police car, he said that he was very scared. He was scared that somebody might shoot him, kill him. And when I hear that, it's unbelievable. You just put 4 bullets into a legend, an icon, an amazing world-renowned artist. You just took his life away, and you're worried about being in the backseat of a police car. Someone's going to shoot you. That's probably That's when I hear that, I get really, really mad about that a lot. So anyhow, when they got to the hospital, they carried in John. He was just a limp body, and in all the documentaries we see the doctor that's working on John, working on him when they came in, was Dr. Stephen Lynn. Now he was the chief of the emergency room department, something like that. I can't remember. I don't know why I'm forgetting it right now. And they brought in John and they laid him on a stretcher and they brought him into the trauma room and they stripped his clothes down and they realized that he was shot 3 times uh, in the upper left chest and down by his elbow. And they said they made an attempt to resuscitate him, but it wasn't. They weren't very successful. He was basically dead on arrival. Uh, in fact, the guy who drove John to the hospital with him laying in the back, he said that John, as far as he could see, there was no movement in the back seat. John didn't say a word. He didn't say anything. He said he was still. He was quiet. I believe that John Lennon died in the back of that police cruiser, without a doubt. And when they brought him into the back seat of that police car, the driver, Jim Moran, said, "Are you John Lennon?" And John Lennon said, "Yes." So the last words that John Lennon said, the last word was yes. Because I believe in those 5 minutes to get from the Dakota to the Roosevelt Hospital, I believe that he died in the back of the cop car. But they tried in vain to work on John to resuscitate him. Stuff that you would. I'm not a doctor or whatever. They tried to fix him. They opened his chest. They could see that it was full of blood. His heart was intact, but all the aorta and all the branches of the aorta were severed and destroyed by the gunshots. So they said there was nothing that they could do. They couldn't restore circulation because all the damaged vessels were damaged too much for them to do anything. The person over the years who claims to have held John Lennon's heart in his hand said they opened the chest, they made the incision, they resuscitate. Like I said, it was Dr. Stephen Lynn. Now, people have said that he is not the doctor who worked on John Lennon, like not the primary guy who helped save his life, or and massaged his heart. I don't know who to believe. I suppose it's none of my. I haven't looked into it. I can't make accusations about who did or who didn't. But Dr. Stephen Lynn claims to be the one who massaged John Lennon's heart to try to get some blood flow and to get it pumping again. But people who work in there were there that night said that he only came over when he seen who it was that they were going to be treating, and he didn't really care very much about it. The real principal, I guess, the principal physician, his name is David Halloran. He worked on John. He said that he massaged his heart, whatnot, and it's been proven. People have said it over the years. Dr. Lynn did not. If he did do anything, it was just to be there to kind of not help out somehow. I'm not quite sure what the word was, but David Halloran is the main person. I think I got that right, David Halloran. He was the guy who massaged John's heart, tried their best. They worked on him. They worked on him, and they were confused at first. They didn't know who he was. They said, one person said, "This looks like John Lennon," and then he'd be like, "No, that's not John Lennon." But when they took out his ID and his wallet, and they seen that it indeed was John Lennon, that put pretty much people like, wow, like we're dealing with John Lennon here. He's just been shot, 4 times. We need to do all that we can for him. But sadly, he was DOA, dead on arrival, at the Roosevelt Hospital. Shortly before, I think it was 11:15, 11:20, they pronounced John Lennon dead. And it's, I don't know, I guess when I get into stuff like that, and I want to clear facts up and whatnot, but it was just such a disregard for a human life. It didn't. John Lennon's death made no sense at all. No sense at all. For him to come all the way from Hawaii, claiming to be a big John Lennon fan, but in actuality, he flew to New York City twice and got his gun and his bullets in the where they put the luggage and whatnot. Both times he flew from Miami and then Hawaii, there, back to Hawaii, back to New York City, stopping over to get bullets from a friend somewhere, I can't remember the name of the place, and then going to New York with a loaded handgun, and that's just it's wow. Like, how did he ever get that on board? But that's like it's like the 9/11 hijackers and whatnot. Totally different video. I'm not gonna go there with that. So, and another thing too about that, I think that his wife knew, MDC's wife knew what he was going to New York to do. And over the years, and you read interviews, you see interviews, and Gloria never knew anything about her husband's intents on going to New York City. This big lawyer guy is talking. That is a bunch of garbage, because she knew that he wanted to go there to kill John Lennon, and she knew it. I don't care what anybody says. Gloria, Abe, or Abba, or something. I don't know how to say it. She claims afterwards, whenever he was going to New York City, he said he was going to go there to kill John Lennon. So for her and her lawyers to say, well, she had no idea he was going to do this. She didn't think anything of it. She didn't think he was actually going to go do this. And people say that. She could have been in disbelief because, by all accounts, anybody who you asked to about MDC said he was a great guy, couldn't have asked for somebody better, can't believe that he was the person who killed John Lennon. So maybe she was naive and whatever, but if she says that she didn't know he was serious, that is completely ridiculous. If he wasn't serious about killing John Lennon, why did he fly to New York City 2 times, stopping over somewhere, could be in Georgia, to get bullets for his gun, to go on to New York City, stalk John for 3 days, pretty much, I've read that, 3 days, and kill John Lennon. And he calls his wife, then now it's December 9th, it's in the after midnight, December 9th, and he called his wife and said, what I done for you, so she don't hear it on the news. And of course, when they knew that was his wife, the reporters. But anyways, she could have made one phone call to save John Lennon's life. She could have said, my husband's on his way to New York City right now. Tells me he's going to kill John Lennon. You better get some security on John. Police could have showed up there. MDC could have been there waiting with his LP and his gun in his pocket. They could have searched him, threw him right in jail right there, or whatever they would have done with him. And it's like, to actually go back to Paul Garesh, it's like when he was leaving, Chapman came up to him and said, "Are you leaving?" And they said yes. And he said, "Well, I wouldn't leave if I were you." He's like, "You may never see him again." Red flag or whatever, light bulb turns on. And then Paul said that he said to him, he's like, "What are you talking about? I see him all the time." That's supposed to be, he said, "Well, he might move to Spain and you'll never see him again." That would have prompted me, personally, to maybe call the police and say, this guy's been hanging around, he's a shady character, like he don't seem right, and this is what he just said to me. Cops could have pulled up, same deal as, checked him out, gun in his pocket, arrested him, and then go from there. So many what ifs, right? It's like any tragedy. So many what ifs. Makes me sick. But anyways, I think that Gloria should have been in jail too, because like I said, she was kind of almost an accessory to murder, I think. Maybe not so much, but she had John Lennon's life was here in her hands, and the telephone's right there. One phone call is all she would have had to make. John Lennon would probably be with us still today. He'd be 80 years old, but he'd probably still be alive, and watch his 2 kids grow up. Julian was 17, and Sean was 5 whenever they lost him. But anyhow, so basically, I suppose to sum it all up, is that's what happened and the whole Gloria thing. So they charged him, and they were looking for how do I word that? So they had a trial set up for June 1981. MDC was going on trial for the murder of John Lennon, and the prosecution said that even though they had the gun, the perpetrator, eyewitnesses, they said it could still be a highly open and shut case, kind of, or no, that's not the thing I'm thinking about. So the prosecution was ready to do this trial, but MDC at the last second changed his plea to guilty by reason of insanity, and he was sentenced to 20 years to life. That's what he's got, 20 years to life. I believe he's been denied parole 8 times, I believe. Yeah, I believe it was. And he's never going to get parole. No way. If anybody would sit there Seeing what he did to John Lennon, I mean, no, you're gonna rot in jail. You're gonna die in jail, and I hope that happens because I think this person. I don't care about. It's they talk about he had a mental illness and this and that reason of insanity, right? So he never stood trial, and he said to himself he bought The Catcher in the Rye, which was a big inspiration for him and all this craziness that he had in his mind and whatnot. And he wrote into the Catcher in the Rye to Holden Caulfield, who was the main character in the book. From Holden Caulfield, this is my statement, and he underlined this because he said he planned to say nothing after the shooting, which is strange because he gave a full confession not long after that he murdered Lennon. It's in one of the documentaries. They wrote out the confession, and he signed it with his own handwriting. So when he changed his plea, the prosecution was disappointed. I can see why they'd be disappointed, but you know what? He pled guilty. He's been in jail since 1981. No, 1980. Well, early 80, whatever. One of those times, the end of December 80, early 81. So he's been in jail for 40 years. And people say, even though had he shot and killed just an everyday average person, whatever the hell that is, he would be out by now. But because it was John Lennon, they're not going to let him go. And I'm thinking to myself, all people are important, If they're going to not grant him parole, or grant parole, however they do it, the fact that he murdered John Lennon was what is keeping him behind bars. Because they say if it was a normal human being, he'd be out by now and be doing good for himself. I don't believe that. He's gonna. I believe and I hope that he does die in prison. That's just my opinion. He took away one of the most famous people in the world. It's just it's just unbelievably sad because John Lennon did nothing to deserve this. Nobody would have done anything to deserve that. So it's terrible, terrible. And he chose the date, December 8th, 1980. In that moment, he chose to alter history and change the lives of millions of people with bang, 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 bang. Gone. Sad. It's very, very sad. John was a nice guy. He's by all accounts, he was great. He was a real nice guy. And it was such a waste of a life. Such a waste of a life. It was so senseless. Some things in life that just doesn't make any sense. John Lennon's death is one of them. So anyhow, sorry I didn't expect this to be this long. And maybe I'm leaving you with more questions than answers. But if you have any questions to me that I might have missed or slipped up on something here, feel free to ask if you're watching this. I'm sorry that it's just me talking. I did the same thing for another musician who died young. It's just me talking about what's trying to clear up discrepancies. And I hope I did that. I'm gonna watch this back and I will see. And if it's good, I will put it online. But hopefully, I was able to share with you some details. I mean, if you're gonna share every single detail that you'll be here for hours. And I'm not the best speaker in the world. I'll admit that. But anyhow, I believe that John Lennon lives. His music lives. I love his music. Double Fantasy is an incredible album. I'm really glad that he really got to make that album. That's really nice. So, rest in peace, John Lennon. 1940, 1980. And rest in peace, Paul Garash. He died too young too as well. So if you watch this and you think it was cool or whatnot, comment below. Like I said, I'm going to review this before I put it online because it might be a little bit more confusing. Now that I'm thinking it back in my head, it might be a little bit confusing, but I hope not. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll try to make more music videos soon and whatnot, drums and guitars. My guitars, I got two of them right there. So yeah, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. See you in the next one.